In discussing the large-scale structure of the cosmos, astronomers sometimes say that space is curved, or that the universe is finite but unbounded. Whatever are they talking about? Let's imagine that we are perfectly flat. I mean absolutely flat. And that we live, appropriately enough, in a flatland. A land designed and named by Edwin Abbott, a Shakespearean scholar who lived in Victorian England. Everybody in flatland is, of course, exceptionally flat. We have squares, circles, triangles, and we all scurry about, and we can go into our houses and do our flat business. Now, we have width and length, but no height at all. Now, these little cutouts have some little height, but let's ignore that. Let's imagine that these are absolutely flat. That being the case, we know, us flatlanders, about left-right, and we know about forward-back, but we have never heard of up-down. Let us imagine that into flatland, hovering above it, comes a strange three-dimensional creature which, oddly enough, looks like an apple. And the three-dimensional creature sees an attractive, congenial-looking square, watches it enter its house, and decides in a gesture of interdimensional amity to say hello. "Hello," says the three-dimensional creature. "How are you? I am a visitor from the third dimension." Well, the poor square looks around his closed house, sees no one there, and what's more, has witnessed a greeting coming from his insides, a voice from within. He surely is getting a little worried about his sanity. The three-dimensional creature is unhappy about being considered a psychological aberration, and so he descends to actually enter flatland. Now, a three-dimensional creature exists in flatland only partially. Only a plane, a cross-section through him can be seen. So when the three-dimensional creature first reaches flatland, it's only the points of contact which can be seen, and we'll represent that by stamping the apple in this ink pad and placing that image in flatland. And as the apple were to descend through, slither by flatland, we would progressively see higher and higher slices, which we can represent by cutting the apple. So the square, as time goes on, sees a set of objects mysteriously appear from nowhere and inside a closed room and change their shape dramatically. His only conclusion could be that he's gone bonkers. Well, the apple might be a little annoyed at this conclusion, and so, not such a friendly gesture from dimension to dimension, makes a contact with the square from below and sends our flat creature fluttering and spinning above flatland. At first, the square has no idea what's happening. He's terribly confused. This is utterly outside his experience. But after a while, he comes to realize that he is seeing inside closed rooms in flatland. He is looking inside his fellow flat creatures. He is seeing flatland from a perspective no one has ever seen it before to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides as an incidental benefit a kind of X-ray vision. Now our flat creature slowly descends to the surface, and his friends rush up to see him. From their point of view, he has mysteriously appeared from nowhere. He hasn't walked from somewhere else. He's come from some other place. They say, "For heaven's sake, what's happened to you?" And the poor square has to say, "Well, I was in some other mystic dimension called up." And they will pat him on his side and comfort him, or else they'll ask, "Well, show us, where is that third dimension? Point to it." And the poor square will be unable to comply. But maybe more interesting is the other direction in dimensionality. What about the fourth dimension?
Now, through inductive reasoning, we can actually infer some very peculiar properties of higher dimensions by considering what the Flatlander sees in relation to what we see as three-dimensional beings. To the Flatlander's vision, the world appears one-dimensional. All he actually sees is lines of varying length. This is because the Flatlanders don't have a third dimension from which they can see themselves. Only we can see them in this way. However, the Flatlander is actually aware that he exists in two dimensions. He sees things in one dimension and infers the second dimension because of something called light and his own movement. As he moves around, the lines get longer or shorter depending on his movements. He can therefore perceive the edges of his fellow sheep friends, and can essentially conceptualize that he and his friends are squares, triangles, and circles. However, he doesn't perceive them as we do. We just merely have to look down at the table and see. If you take a look around yourself right now, you can see that everything within your vision is simply a two-dimensional plane. You're able to infer the third dimension with varying degrees of light, shadows, and reflections. This is why a two-dimensional photograph can convey three-dimensional places to us quite well. However, much like the Flatlander, you don't actually understand what you really look like, as a fourth-dimensional being might see. With that being said, allow me to present to you Father Spiridon speaking on the subject. Spiridon writes of these supernatural beings.
Though we cannot completely comprehend or define their nature, we can describe the activity of the angels from patristic and biblical sources. Throughout the Bible, we see angels acting as God's messengers and appearing in forms that do not completely overwhelm the men to whom they reveal themselves. Demons too take on many forms, but the purpose of their transformation is not to protect us, but in order that they may deceive us. As a result of the fall, our human bodies and their senses have lost the capacity to perceive the spiritual reality for which they were created. As Saint Ignatius Bryanchynov writes, "In this condition of darkness, by reason of their extreme crudeness and coarseness, the bodily senses are incapable of communion with the spirits. They do not see them, do not hear them, do not sense them. Thus, the blunted axe is no longer capable of being used according to its purpose. The Holy Spirits avoid communion, while the fallen spirits have drawn us into their fall, have mingled with us, as to more easily hold us in their captivity." Father Seraphim cites the example of the Archangel Raphael, who traveled to Tobias for weeks without anyone suspecting he wasn't a physical man. Similarly, Abraham believed that the three angels who visited him were mortal men, and in both stories the angels supported this impression by eating and drinking. Therefore, we see that even God's angels adapt their appearance in order that men may see and communicate with them.